Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something I think a lot of you have probably heard of,
Right.
at least the name,
Mhm.
cognitive behavioral therapy,
Yeah, CBT.
CBT.
We're going deep on CBT.
We're going
Yeah.
deep, and the source material that you gave me was really interesting because it was an excerpt from like a larger piece, but it read almost like a personal reflection
Oh, interesting.
on CBT.
Yeah,
What do you make of that?
I think you're right. It is interesting. It kind of speaks to the fact that CBT, while it is rooted in science and it's very much a scientific approach to therapy,
Yeah.
it also has this kind of adaptable quality to it.
Yeah.
There's a certain fluidity. It's not just a rigid set of techniques.
Right.
It's more of a framework.
Yeah.
And that framework is constantly evolving.
Okay, so for those listening who are like, oh, CBT, yeah, that's just another trendy therapy.
Right.
Set the record straight for us. What are the foundations of CBT? What are we really talking about here?
Yeah, CBT, right from the start, it was this fusion of two very powerful approaches to well-being and to psychology.
Mm,
You have the cognitive side, which is really understanding how our thoughts influence our feelings and our actions.
okay.
And then you have the behavioral side, which is really focusing on those patterns of behavior that we've developed.
So not just laying on the couch and talking about your childhood.
Not necessarily.
No.
It's about action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even some of the early pioneers like Adler were already talking about what we call psychoeducation, which is really just about equipping people with knowledge
Yeah.
about how their mind works. But it was really Aaron Beck back in the 1960s who, with his book Instruction of Cognitive Behavioral Therapy,
Mm.
really formalized CBT.
Okay. Now, one of the things that the source material really emphasizes is Beck's three-tiered model.
Right.
Help us unpack that,
Okay.
because that seems to be really central to how CBT works.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to think about it is to imagine these three different levels of cognition. The first level, you have your automatic thoughts.
Right? These are the immediate reactions that we have to situations. That underneath those automatic thoughts are what we call rules and assumptions. These are things that we've picked up along the way, often without even realizing it. But they are influencing how we interpret the world. And then at the very deepest level, we have what are called our core beliefs.
Okay.
These are the fundamental beliefs that we hold about ourselves and about the world.
So CBT is helping you kind of unearth all of that.
In a way,
Yes.
it's helping you to identify and to understand those different levels of cognition and to see how they're impacting your experience.
That's deeper than I initially thought.
It can be. And the interesting thing is that while Beck was initially focused on treating depression,
Okay.
CBT is now used for such a wide range of conditions: anxiety, PTSD, even things like chronic pain management.
Wow.
So it really speaks to how much our thoughts and our behaviors influence our overall well-being.
Okay, so we've talked about action.
Right.
How does CBT actually move beyond just talk? What makes a CBT session different from, say, just a classic talk therapy session?
Yeah. So CBT is very much problem-focused and action-oriented.
Mm.
One of the core practices in CBT is called case formulation.
Okay.
And this is where you and the therapist work together
Mm-hmm.
to really understand the specific issues that you're facing. It's not the therapist dictating to you. It's very much a collaborative process.
So no generic advice.
Not at all.
Like, oh, you're anxious. Just don't worry about it.
No. It's very much tailored to your unique situation.
It really dives into the specifics.
Yeah, and that's where the action part comes in.
Okay.
CBT often involves what we call homework assignments.
Okay.
So things like charts or scales
Yeah.
to really help you to apply what you're learning in between sessions.
You're actively engaged.
You are. You're not just reflecting on it.
Okay.
You're actually putting it into practice.
Now, the source material also mentioned that CBT has expanded like way beyond Beck's initial model.
It has?
Almost like it's hit this turning point. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's true. CBT has been integrated with a lot of other therapies, and as a result, we now have all these different approaches that have stemmed from CBT.
Yeah.
So you have dialectical behavior therapy,
Mm-hmm.
you have schema therapy, compassion-focused therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy,
Right.
and even mindfulness-based CBT.
Wow. That's a mouthful.
That's a whole family.
Yeah. So it's not just one thing. It's this constantly growing
It is family tree.
a family tree of therapies.
Yeah.
And this is where that quote about CBT reaching a threshold of excellence comes in,
Okay.
because it captures this exciting kind of tension. CBT has achieved so much,
Yeah.
but at the same time, there's still so much potential.
So it's not a finished product,
Not at all.
which I guess makes sense when you're
Right.
dealing with something as complex as the human mind.
Exactly. The human mind is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And so our approaches to understanding it and working with it.
So what are some of the areas where CBT could still use some work? I
Mm.
mean, the source material mentions that it's not a magic bullet.
Where do those limitations come in?
Well, one of the things that can be both a strength and a limitation of CBT is its structured nature.
Mm.
That clear framework that we talked about can be really helpful for some people. It provides a sense of direction.
Right.
But for other individuals who maybe have very complex mental health needs, or for individuals who struggle to adhere to those kinds of rigid structures, it might not be the best fit.
It also makes me think that you probably need a certain level of self-awareness
Yes,
and
absolutely.
like cognitive ability to
Sure.
really engage in CBT.
You need to be able to reflect on your thoughts,
Right.
to
Yeah.
be able to identify those patterns.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned in the source material, sometimes that can be really challenging for people with learning difficulties
Yeah.
or for people who are struggling with very low self-esteem
Yeah.
and who have a very critical inner voice.
So it's not that it couldn't be helpful for them.
Right.
It's just that the approach might need to be adapted.
It might need to be tweaked.
Yeah.
And that's where the expertise of the therapist really comes in. Because it's not about blindly applying these techniques.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the individual, their specific challenges, and then tailoring the approach accordingly.
So that case formulation idea is even more important.
It's crucial.
Yeah.
It's not just about diagnosing a condition. It's about really understanding the whole person
Mhm.
and then collaboratively crafting that roadmap with the client.
So it's not this top-down,
No,
here's your treatment plan.
not at all.
It's a collaboration.
It's very much a partnership.
And actually, that brings up something else that I think is really important
Go
that
to-
sometimes gets overlooked when we're talking about all the techniques and all the different approaches.
Yeah,
And that's the therapeutic relationship itself,
absolutely.
right? It's not just about homework assignments and doing the work. It's about that connection.
It's about that human connection.
Yeah.
That's so essential for healing and for growth.
Yeah.
You need to feel safe.
Yeah.
You need to feel understood.
It makes sense. You need to have that trust and that rapport.
Exactly. Without that, even the most sophisticated techniques might not be as effective.
Now, that reminds me of something else from the source material, which is this idea that CBT is really about empowering individuals to become their own therapists
Yes.
over time. How does that happen if the relationship is so important?
Well, it's not about replacing the therapist entirely,
Okay.
but it's about equipping the client with the skills and the insights that they need to navigate their own inner landscape.
So you're learning to become more self-sufficient.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a gradual process of transferring that knowledge and those tools.
So instead of being reliant on the therapist forever, you're learning to use those tools.
You're learning to become your own best advocate
Okay.
for your own mental and emotional well-being.
So how does that work in practice? What are some of the specific tools that CBT therapists use to help people reach that point?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to dive into in the next part.
Yeah.
But just to give you a little preview, think of it as building this mental toolbox.
Okay.
And that toolbox includes strategies for challenging negative thoughts, for managing difficult emotions, and for breaking free from those unhelpful behaviors.
It's like a personal development program,
It is, in a way.
but it's very structured
Yeah.
and evidence-based.
Exactly. It's not just random self-help tips.
Right.
It's really grounded in solid research.
Right.
And as the source material emphasizes, understanding this interconnectedness of our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors is so crucial. They all influence each other in these very intricate ways.
So they're not separate compartments.
They're not. It's all interwoven.
Okay.
And CBT helps you to become aware of those dynamics so you can start to break free from those negative cycles
Okay.
and create more positive patterns in your life.
That is fascinating. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
We are.
Oh.
We've laid a good foundation,
Okay.
but there's so much more to explore.
Let's take a pause here. And in part 2, we will delve deeper into those specific techniques and we'll really explore how CBT empowers you to become your own therapist.
That's good. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
So before we jump into those techniques, you mentioned something at the end of the last part that really got my attention.
Oh, yeah.
That idea about CBT still needing more development, even though
Yeah.
it's been so successful. What are the frontiers? Like, what are researchers looking at?
Yeah, that really stood out to me too. It's like CBT is at this exciting kind of crossroads. So what are those areas where there's still room for growth? Where are the critics saying it could be refined even further?
Well, one thing that comes up is this idea of the structured nature of CBT,
Okay.
which on the one hand can be a strength because it gives people that really clear framework.
Right.
But on the other hand, that same structure can also be limiting.
Yeah.
So if you think about individuals who have really complex mental health needs, or individuals who have a hard time adhering to rigid structures,
Right.
the traditional CBT approach might not be the best fit.
It makes me think about how with CBT, you need to have that self-awareness
Yes.
and that ability to analyze your own thoughts.
Exactly. You need to have a certain degree of cognitive ability
Right.
that not everybody has readily available.
Yeah.
And the source material specifically mentions that it can be particularly challenging for people with learning difficulties
Yeah.
or for people who struggle with very low self-esteem
Right.
and who have a very harsh inner critic.
It's not that it couldn't work for them,
Right.
but the approach might need to be adapted.
It might need to be adapted.
Yeah.
It might need to be tweaked.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the expertise of the therapist really comes in. Because it's not just about blindly applying these techniques. It's about really understanding the individual, their specific challenges,
Right.
and then tailoring the approach accordingly.
So that case formulation that we talked about becomes even more important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's crucial. It's not just about diagnosing a condition.
Right.
It's about understanding the whole person
Okay.
and then collaboratively crafting that roadmap with the client.
So it's not this like top-down, here's your treatment plan. Is it a law?
It's a collaboration.
It's very much a partnership.
And that actually makes me think about something else that's really important.
Yeah.
That sometimes gets overlooked when we're talking about all the techniques and the different approaches, which is the therapeutic relationship itself.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not just about like doing the work.
Yes.
It's about that connection.
That human connection is so essential for healing and for growth.
Yeah.
You need to feel safe.
Right.
You need to feel understood.
Yeah.
You need to have that trust and rapport.
That makes sense in any relationship.
In any relationship, and especially in therapy. Because without that foundation, even the most sophisticated techniques might not be as effective.
Now, that reminds me of something else from the source material.
Okay.
Which is this idea that CBT is really about empowering individuals to become their own therapists over time.
Yes.
But how does that happen if the relationship is so important?
It's not about replacing the therapist entirely.
It's more about equipping the client with the skills and the insights that they need
Okay.
to navigate their own
Yeah.
mental and emotional landscape.
So you're learning to become more self-sufficient.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a gradual process of transferring that knowledge and those tools.
So instead of being reliant on the therapist forever, you're learning to use those tools yourself.
You're learning to become your own best advocate
Yeah.
for your own mental and emotional well-being.
Okay. So let's get into it then. How does that work in practice? What are some of those specific tools that CBT therapists use?
All right, so one of the techniques that's very central to CBT is what are called cognitive restructuring.
Okay.
And this is all about identifying and challenging those negative or distorted thought patterns that contribute to emotional distress.
So it's not about like denying those negative emotions altogether.
Right.
It's more about,
It's about recognizing that our thoughts are not always accurate reflections of reality.
okay.
They can be biased, they can be exaggerated,
Mhm.
they can be based on faulty assumptions. And by learning to question those thoughts, we can actually start to shift our perspective and reduce their power over us.
So it takes practice.
It does. It takes practice.
It's like becoming a detective of your own mind.
I love that. It's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about developing that metacognitive awareness,
Okay.
the ability to observe your own thoughts and feelings without judgment.
And then once you've identified those unhelpful thought patterns,
Right.
what do you do?
Then you can start to challenge them. You can start to ask yourself, is this thought really true? What's the evidence for this thought? Is there another way of looking at this situation?
So it's not about like positive thinking.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
No. It's not about pretending that everything is perfect.
Right.
It's more about developing a more accurate and a more helpful way of thinking,
Okay.
because that can make a huge difference in how we feel and how we behave.
Now, the source material also mentions something called behavioral activation.
Yes.
How does that fit into the whole like self-therapy idea?
So behavioral activation is based on this really simple but powerful principle that action can actually influence our mood
Okay.
and can create positive momentum in our lives.
Mm.
Often when we're feeling down or when we're struggling, we tend to withdraw. We tend to avoid activities that we used to enjoy.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle. You
Yeah.
feel bad, so you avoid things, which makes you feel worse,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
Right.
So behavioral activation is about breaking that cycle by encouraging engagement.
Okay.
even if it feels difficult at first,
So even if you don't feel like doing anything,
even if you don't feel like it.
just the act of getting out there and doing something.
It can actually help to shift your mood.
Mm,
It might seem counterintuitive,
yeah.
but our actions can have a profound impact on our thoughts and our feelings.
Okay.
And by engaging in activities that are meaningful to us, even in small ways,
Yeah.
we can start to challenge those negative thought patterns and create a more positive feedback loop.
It's like jump-starting your engine.
Exactly, like jump-starting your engine, getting those wheels turning again.
Yeah.
And it highlights this importance of taking an active role in your own recovery.
Yeah.
You're not just passively waiting for things to get better.
Right.
You're actually taking concrete steps.
And that's where that self-therapy aspect comes in.
Exactly.
You're not just doing it in the therapist's office. You're taking those skills.
We're taking it out into the real world.
Yeah.
And you're applying it.
Cool. So we've got cognitive restructuring to help you challenge those negative thoughts. And then we've got behavioral activation
Right.
to kind of get you unstuck and create some momentum.
To get the ball rolling.
What other tools does CBT offer?
Well, there are a whole range of techniques, and they often work in combination.
Yeah.
So in addition to cognitive restructuring and behavioral activation, we also have relaxation techniques,
Okay.
things like deep breathing or progressive muscle relaxation,
Yeah.
which can be incredibly helpful for managing anxiety and stress.
Right.
And then we also have problem-solving strategies,
Yeah. Okay.
which can help people to address practical challenges in their lives
Yeah.
that are contributing to their emotional distress.
That makes sense. And of course, there's the infamous CBT homework.
Right. The homework assignments.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The homework assignments are an essential part of CBT.
So they're not just busy work.
They're not busy work. They're really designed to help you to bridge that gap between what you learn in therapy and how you actually apply it in your daily life.
So it's not just talking about change. You're
Are you-
actually putting it into practice.
You're
So
putting it into practice. Exactly. And
yeah.
it might involve keeping a thought journal,
To track
those negative thought patterns. It might involve practicing relaxation techniques. It might even involve engaging in exposure therapy.
Now, exposure therapy comes up a lot when people talk about CBT.
It does.
Is that something that people are doing on their own as part of their homework, or is that more guided by the therapist?
So exposure therapy is usually conducted with the guidance of a therapist, especially in the initial stages, because it can be a very powerful technique for overcoming phobias and anxieties.
Yeah.
But it needs to be done very carefully and systematically.
You're not just throwing someone into their worst fear right away.
Exactly. You wouldn't want to do that. You want to do it in a very gradual way,
Yeah.
starting with those situations that cause less anxiety,
Okay.
and then gradually working up to those more challenging ones.
It sounds like those homework assignments are really about making it an active process.
Absolutely. It's about engaging you
Yeah.
in the process.
You're not just passively listening to a therapist.
Not at all.
You're doing the work.
You're doing the work.
And that's how you become your own therapist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The more you practice these techniques,
Yeah.
the more confident you become in your ability to manage those thoughts, those emotions, and those behaviors,
It's like building that resilience.
building that resilience.
Exactly.
So you can kind of weather the storms of life
Exactly. It's about being able to navigate those ups and downs.
with greater skill and awareness. And while the therapist might provide that initial guidance and support, the ultimate goal is for you to internalize those tools and to become your own best resource.
So CBT is not about like quick fixes or magic solutions.
No,
It's about equipping you
it's about equipping you.
with the knowledge and the skills.
It is, and it can be work,
Yeah.
but it's work that can lead to really profound and lasting change.
It's an investment.
It's an investment in yourself
Yeah.
and in your well-being.
This has been really insightful. I think it's clear that CBT is much more than just talk therapy.
It is.
It's a really comprehensive approach to like personal growth and transformation.
It's about understanding this interconnectedness of our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors, and learning to harness that knowledge to create positive change in our lives.
Okay, so we've unpacked the core principles of CBT.
We have.
We've explored the limitations, and we've delved into some of the key techniques. But before we wrap things up, I'm curious to get your thoughts on something the source material touched on, which is this idea of CBT having a broader impact beyond just individual change.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point to consider.
So we were talking about that idea from the source material.
Right, that CBT could have this broader impact.
Yeah, beyond just helping individuals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, what if it could actually contribute to like a wider shift
Yeah.
in how we approach mental well-being as a society.
That's what I thought was so interesting. It's like, imagine if more people had these tools, right, for self-awareness,
Yeah.
emotional regulation,
Mm-hmm.
like the ability to challenge those negative thought spirals.
Absolutely.
What impact could that have on everything from relationships to workplaces to like,
It's like a ripple effect,
yeah,
right? Individuals who are equipped with these skills
yeah,
could then bring those insights into their interactions with others,
yeah,
and that could lead to healthier communication,
right.
better conflict resolution, maybe even greater empathy.
And think about the workplace. Oh, yeah.
Stress burnout.
Huge.
All these things that CBT addresses.
Absolutely.
If individuals are better equipped to manage those things internally,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't that create a more productive
I think so.
and a more humane work environment?
Yeah, definitely. And there's also the issue of stigma,
Okay.
right? CBT, by its very nature, kind of normalizes this idea that we can learn skills to manage our mental and emotional well-being,
Yeah.
just like we learn physical health habits.
Right. It's not something to be ashamed of.
Exactly.
Say,
It's
what?
part of being human.
Yeah. You learn how to take care of yourself.
Right. And if that becomes more mainstream, it could really help to break down those barriers to seeking help.
Instead of it being this like taboo topic that people are afraid to talk about,
Exactly.
it's something that we can openly discuss and address.
Absolutely.
That would be huge.
It'd be a huge shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's the preventative aspect.
Oh, yeah.
What if CBT principles were integrated into education systems?
Oh.
Think about that.
Yeah. Equipping young people with these coping mechanisms
Imagine.
from an early age.
That's incredible.
It's not just about treating existing problems.
Right.
It's about building resilience and emotional intelligence.
So on the ground up.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
And that goes back to that quote about CBT reaching a threshold of excellence but still needing more development.
Yes.
That broader societal impact.
That's a frontier.
Yeah.
That's worth exploring.
So as much as CBT has achieved, there's still so much potential
So much potential.
to unlock, not just for individuals,
Right.
but for society as a whole.
It's exciting. It's an exciting prospect. And I think it
Yeah.
requires continued research and innovation and a willingness to really challenge those existing paradigms.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
We've gone from like the historical foundations of CBT to the cutting edge of its potential,
Yeah.
both for individuals and for the wider world.
It's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah.
And I think the key takeaway for our listeners today is that CBT offers more than just a set of techniques.
Yeah.
It offers a framework for understanding
Yeah.
the human mind
Yeah.
and harnessing its power for positive change.
If this deep dive has piqued your interest, there are so many resources out there.
Absolutely.
Books, articles, and of course, qualified therapists who can guide you on your journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember, finding the right therapeutic approach is very personal.
Right.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Yeah.
So trust your instincts, do your research, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
We've only just scratched the surface
Yeah.
of this vast and fascinating field. Maybe in a future deep dive,
Yeah.
we can explore one of those specialized CBT approaches we touched on earlier.
We could do a whole deep dive on DBT.
Yeah, like DBT or ACT.
I'd love that.
There's always more to discover.
In the world of CBT,
But for now, we'll leave you with this final thought. What if the most powerful tool for healing and growth lies within you? Just waiting to be unlocked through understanding and practice.
that's something to ponder.
Until next time, keep diving deep. Stay curious and remember the power to change your mind is within your grasp.